What would you do if a stranger appeared at your door claiming to be family? When one wealthy woman faces this question, the answer unravels a story of heartbreak, regret, and hope. Margaret Ellsworth was a woman whose life seemed perfect on the outside. At 62, she had built an empire from scratch, owning a chain of luxury bakeries across the country. Her sprawling estate in New York's countryside symbolized her success, a modern mansion surrounded by manicured gardens and an air of exclusivity. Yet, despite the glitz and glamour, Margaret's life was eerily quiet. Behind her opulent lifestyle lay a loneliness she had grown adept at masking. The echoes of her footsteps in her vast home served as a constant reminder of the family she had long lost contact with. Years ago, her relationship with her daughter, Anna, had fractured beyond repair. A misunderstanding had spiraled into a bitter argument, culminating in Anna leaving the house and severing all ties. Margaret buried herself in her work, convincing herself that time would heal their wounds. But the years passed, and Anna never returned. Regret festered deep within Margaret, though her pride refused to let her reach out. On an ordinary Tuesday morning, as Margaret reviewed financial reports in her sunlit office, her solitude was interrupted by an unexpected knock at the door, a sound that would shatter the careful monotony of her life. Margaret opened the door to find a boy standing there, no older than 10. His wide brown eyes held a blend of nervousness and determination. Clutching a small, tattered backpack, the boy introduced himself. "My name is Samuel, and I am your grandson." For a moment, Margaret stood frozen, her mind racing to make sense of his words. Grandson? It seemed impossible. Her only child, Anna, had left nearly a decade ago and had never once contacted. Confusion turned to skepticism as Margaret studied the. He looked fragile, his clothes slightly worn, but there was a faint familiarity in his features, something about the curve of his smile that tugged at her memory. "How did you get here? Who sent?" she asked, her tone sharper than she and Samuel flinched but didn't step back. "I came alone. My mom. She told me to find you before." His voice faltered, and he cast his gaze down. Before Margaret's mind churned with possibilities, but before she could ask, Samuel whispered, "She's sick, really sick. I didn't know where else." This revelation hit Margaret like a tidal. She ushered him inside, unsure of what lay ahead but unable to turn him. Margaret led Samuel into her spacious living room, the grandeur of the space feeling almost oppressive in its size. She offered him a seat on the velvet sofa and poured him a glass of water, her hands trembling ever so slightly. As the boy took cautious sips, she sat across from him, studying his every move. Questions swirled in her mind, but she decided to approach. "Samuel, can you tell me more about your mother?" she asked, her voice softening. He looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness. "She's my mom, Anna. She said you are her mom too." His words were innocent yet heavy, each syllable carrying the weight of an unresolved past. Margaret's heart constricted. Hearing Anna's name after all these years brought a flood of emotions she wasn't prepared for: guilt, sorrow, and a faint glimmer of. She struggled to keep her composure. "Where is Anna?" she pressed gently. Samuel hesitated, fiddling with the hem of his jacket. "She's in the hospital. It's bad." He paused, his voice trembling. "She said I needed to come to you, that you'd help us." The boy's plea pierced through Margaret's carefully constructed walls of detachment. Margaret's mind raced. Her instincts told her to call someone, anyone, for help, but she was paralyzed by the emotions welling up inside. She had so many questions, yet Samuel's fragile state made her tread carefully. "How did you get here?" she finally asked, trying to piece together the boy's. Samuel looked up, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Mom told me to take a bus. She gave me the address and said to come straight here," he explained, his voice. "I didn't want to leave her, but she said she needed me to be safe." The determination in his small voice was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Margaret could see he had been through more than any child. She exhaled deeply, rising to her feet and pacing the room. "And you came all this way alone?" she murmured, more to herself than to Samuel. He nodded silently. The realization of Anna's dire situation hit her like a freight train. Whatever had transpired between them, Margaret knew she couldn't ignore the plea for. "All right," she said firmly, her voice carrying an air of "You are safe here now. Let's figure this out together." Her words seemed to soothe Samuel, though Margaret knew this was only the beginning of a much larger. Margaret found herself sitting at the edge of her bed that night, unable to sleep. Samuel had fallen asleep in one of the guest rooms, clutching a stuffed bear she had given him. The boy's arrival felt like a crack in her carefully maintained life, allowing memories she had long buried to surface. She thought of Anna, the fiery, independent daughter who had always challenged her authority. Their last argument had been heated, with words spoken that Margaret deeply regretted. The next morning, Margaret made a decision. She would visit Anna in the hospital. However, Samuel's presence was a reminder of how unprepared she was to face her estranged daughter. "You'll need to guide me through this," she whispered to herself. Over breakfast, Samuel's hesitant smile warmed the room.
"Do you like pancakes?"
Margaret asked, trying to bridge the distance. He nodded, his shy demeanor softening as he devoured the meal. "Mom makes pancakes too, but not like these," he admitted. His voice held an innocence that tugged at her heart. Later, Margaret called her driver and instructed him to take them to the hospital. Samuel sat quietly beside her in the car, holding her hand tightly as they approached the facility. As they entered the building, Margaret's heart raced. She didn't know what to expect or how Anna would react to seeing her. In the dimly lit hospital room, Margaret saw her daughter for the first time in almost a decade. Anna was unrecognizable, her once radiant complexion pale, her body frail. She lay in the bed, her breathing shallow but steady. For a moment, Margaret froze, overcome by the weight of guilt and regret. "Mom?" Anna's voice was weak, but it carried a familiar warmth. It was clear that Samuel's visit had prompted this fragile reunion. "You came," Margaret approached cautiously, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Anna," she began, her voice trembling. "I am so sorry." "Tea, here is no time for that now," Anna said softly, a faint smile playing on her lips. I needed to see you again." For Samuel, she gestured toward her son, who had climbed onto the bed and was holding her hand. "He's all I have, Mom. I needed to know he'd be safe." Margaret's eyes brimmed with tears as she sat down beside them. "He will be," she promised, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "You have my word." Over the next hour, the two women began to tentatively rebuild the bridge that had been burned years ago. Anna explained the struggles she had faced losing her job, raising Samuel alone, and eventually falling ill. Despite her pride, she had known she had no choice but to turn to Margaret for help. Margaret listened intently, each word deepening her resolve. She realized that no amount of wealth or success could erase the pain of losing a child, or the chance to set things right. "I'll take care of everything," she said, her hand resting on Anna's. "You don't need to worry anymore." The conversation ended with an unspoken understanding, a fragile truce built on love, regret, and the hope for a second chance. As Margaret and Samuel left the hospital, she felt a sense of... Over the following weeks, Margaret began to adjust to Samuel's presence in her home. At first, the boy's quiet demeanor and cautious movements were a stark contrast to the opulence around him. He seemed unsure of his place, careful not to touch anything unless given permission. Yet, his curiosity shone through in small ways, examining the intricate sculptures in the hallway, or peeking at the towering bookshelf in Margaret's. One evening, as Margaret worked late, she found Samuel sitting cross-legged on the rug in front of the fireplace. Flipping through an old photo album he looked up when she entered, a hesitant smile on his face. "Is this you?" he asked. Margaret sat beside him, her gaze softening as she recognized the image. "Yes, that's me and your mother," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "She was about your age then." Samuel's face lit up. Despite everything, Anna had spoken kindly. The moment felt like a crack in the wall Samuel had built around himself. He began to share snippets of his life, how Anna always made up bedtime stories for him, how she told him he could do anything if he worked hard enough. Margaret listened, her heart swelling with both pride. She realized how much she had missed, and how deeply Samuel had been shaped by his mother's love and resilience. That night, as Samuel slept peacefully in his bed, Margaret made a silent vow to honor Anna's strength by giving Samuel the life he deserved. As Margaret and Samuel grew closer, the reality of Anna's condition loomed heavy in the background. Margaret visited her daughter daily, often bringing Samuel. These visits were bittersweet moments of connection, interspersed with the undeniable signs of Anna's declining health. One afternoon, as Margaret sat by Anna's bedside, Anna looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and urge. "Mom," she began, her voice strained but determined. "I need you to promise me something." Margaret leaned in, her heart pounding. Promise me you'll raise Samuel like you raised Meadow. Be strong, to work hard, to love deep." Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I promise, Anna," she said, her voice "I'll give him everything I can." That night, back at home, Margaret found herself pacing the living room, consumed by the weight of her She looked around at the house she had built, a monument to her success, and realized how hollow it felt without family to share it. The following morning, she took Samuel into town. Together they picked out supplies for his new room, transforming the previously impersonal guest space into a warm, welcoming sanctuary. Samuel beamed as they arranged the furniture and hung posters of his favorite superheroes on the walls. For the first time, Margaret felt a glimmer. Samuel's laughter echoed through the halls, filling the house with a light it hadn't known in years. Despite the uncertainty of the future, Margaret was determined to make every moment count for Anna, for Samuel, and for the family they were beginning to rebuild. The call came early in the morning, cutting through the quiet of Margaret's home. It was from the hospital. Anna's condition had worsened overnight, and the doctors urged Margaret to come as soon as possible. The words felt like a cold wind sweeping through her, numbing her senses. For a moment she stood frozen, clutching the phone tightly. She quickly turned to Samuel, who was sitting at the kitchen table finishing his breakfast. "Samuel," she said softly, kneeling down to meet his gaze, "we need to visit your mom right now." Samuel's wide eyes reflected his fear, though he said nothing. Margaret could see the questions he was too scared to ask. "She needs us with her," she continued, forcing her voice to remain steady. "We're going to be strong for her." Samuel nodded, his small hand gripping hers for reassurance. The drive to the hospital was silent, each passing minute amplifying the weight of them. When they arrived at Anna's room, the sight of her daughter made Margaret's breath catch. Anna looked frail, her once vibrant spirit dimmed by the illness that had consumed. Yet when her eyes landed on Samuel, a faint smile graced her lips. "Samuel," Anna said weakly, her voice barely. The boy ran to her bedside, climbing onto the chair so he could hold her hand. "I am here, Mom," he whispered, his small voice trembling. "Grandma and I are both." Margaret approached slowly, her heart breaking at the sight before her. "Anna," she said gently, her voice trembling with a mixture of sorrow. And Anna's eyes met hers, and for the first time in years, there was no trace of anger, only a quiet understanding. "You came," Anna murmured, her words carrying gratitude and relief. "Thank you for taking care of Samuel." Margaret's throat tightened. "I'll always take care of him," she promised, tears streaming down her face. "I'll protect him, Anna. You don't need to worry about any." As the hours passed, Margaret and Samuel stayed by Anna's side. The hospital room, though sterile and cold, was filled with warmth as they shared memories and Anna mustered enough strength to tell Samuel about the time he was born, her voice soft but filled with "You were the best thing that ever happened to me," she said, brushing his hair with trembling fingers. Samuel clung to her words, his tears falling silently. Margaret, sitting close, held both their hands, feeling the unspoken bond that tied them together. In that moment, all the bitterness and regret Margaret had harbored melted away, replaced by an overwhelming desire to honor her daughter's wishes and give Samuel the life Anna had dreamed of. As the evening approached, Anna's strength began to wane. Her breathing grew shallower, her words. Margaret could feel the inevitability of the moment, but she stayed composed for Samuel. The boy sat by his mother's side, his small hand never leaving her. "Mom," he said quietly, breaking the heavy silence. "You always said I could do anything. I promise I'll make you proud." His voice was filled with innocence and determination, a combination that made Margaret's heart. Anna's eyes glistened with tears as she looked at him. "You already make me proud, Samuel," she whispered. "You are my brave boy. Always remember that." Margaret gently brushed Anna's hair back, her fingers trembling. "Anna," she said softly, "is there anything else you want me to know? Anything?" Anna gave a faint nod, her lips curving into the shadow of a smile. "Just teach him to love," she said, her voice fading. Margaret nodded, her own tears flowing freely now. "I will," she promised. "I'll make sure." As the night fell, Anna's breathing slowed. each moment feeling heavier than the last. Samuel's quiet sniffles were the only sound in the room. Margaret held her daughter's hand, whispering words of comfort. "It's okay, Anna," she said. Her voice "We're here. You are not alone." In her final moments, Anna looked at both of them, her love shining through despite her exhaustion. "I love you," she whispered. Her words directed at Samuel but meant for both of them. With that, her eyes closed, and a peaceful stillness settled over. Margaret and Samuel remained by her side, their shared grief palpable. Margaret pulled Samuel into her arms as he sobbed quietly, her own tears falling into his. "We'll be okay," she murmured, though the words felt hollow. "We'll find a way." The drive home was somber, the weight of Anna's loss settling heavily on both. But as they entered the house, Margaret looked at Samuel and saw a flicker of resilience in his eyes. She realized that while their journey forward would be difficult, they had each other, and that was enough to. In the days following Anna's passing, Margaret and Samuel began to navigate their grief together. The house, once filled with laughter and memories of their time with Anna, now felt heavy, and Samuel often retreated to his room, holding on to a photo of his mother that Margaret had framed. Margaret, too, found herself lost in reflection, replaying moments from the hospital and thinking about the promise she had made to. One afternoon, while clearing out Anna's belongings, Margaret stumbled upon a small wooden box. Inside was a journal filled with Anna's thoughts and dreams. Margaret hesitated before opening it, unsure if she was ready to face her daughter's world. But as she flipped through the pages, she found herself drawn into Anna's world, her struggles, her triumphs, and her hopes for Samuel's future. One entry in particular stood, "I hope Samuel grows up knowing he's loved," Anna had, "and I hope he never feels like he has to hide who he is or where he comes from. Mom will guide him, I know." The words hit Margaret like a tidal wave, a mixture of pride and sorrow surging. Anna had trusted her completely, even after years of estrangement. That trust became Margaret's anchor, a reminder of the responsibility she now. That evening, Margaret brought the journal to Samuel's room. Sitting beside him on the bed, she opened it to one of the lighter entries, a story Anna had written about Samuel's first. "Your mom wrote about you a lot," she said softly, handing the journal. Samuel's face lit up as he read the words. "She called me her little explorer," he said, smiling for the first time in days. Margaret felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in a long time. "That's because you are," she replied. "And now we're going to explore this new chapter." From that moment on, Margaret resolved to create a life for Samuel that honored Anna's wishes. Margaret's first step toward fulfilling her promise to Anna was enrolling Samuel in a school where he could thrive. After weeks of research, she found a private academy known for its nurturing environment and strong emphasis on creativity. When she presented the idea to Samuel, he hesitated. "What if they don't like?" he asked quietly, his eyes down. Margaret knelt down to meet his gaze. "They'll love you," she said, "and if they don't, they're not worth your time. You are amazing, Samuel. Don't ever forget that." On his first day, Margaret accompanied Samuel to the school. His nervousness was palpable, but she could see a flicker of curiosity as he watched other children playing in the courtyard. "I'll be right here to pick you up," Margaret reassured. "You've got this." When the school day ended, Samuel ran back to her with a wide grin. "I made 2 friends," he announced, his excitement bubbling. Margaret's heart swelled with pride. Meanwhile, Margaret channeled her grief into action. Inspired by Anna's journal, she decided to establish a foundation in her daughter's. The foundation would provide support to single parents and their children, offering resources and opportunities that Anna had struggled to. Samuel became her partner in the endeavor. Together, they brainstormed ideas for programs, and one day, as they worked on a flyer for the foundation's launch, Samuel looked up at Margaret with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think Mom would be happy with this?" Margaret smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "She'd be more than happy," she said. "She'd be proud of both of us." The foundation's launch event was a resounding success. Families from all walks of life came together, sharing their stories and finding hope in the resources. Margaret watched Samuel interact with the other children, his confidence growing with each passing moment. That night, as they returned home, Samuel hugged Margaret tightly. "Thank you, Grandma," he said. Margaret held him close, her heart full. "Thank you, Samuel," for reminding me what really mattered. As months passed, Margaret and Samuel began to settle into a new rhythm. The once quiet mansion now buzzed with life. Samuel had become an integral part of the home, his cheerful demeanor bringing warmth to every corner. Margaret found joy in the small moments, helping Samuel with his homework, listening to his stories about school, and sharing meals where they both talked freely about Anna. These moments of connection filled the void that had long haunted Margaret, making her realize how much she had missed out on while chasing success. Meanwhile, the foundation established in Anna's name gained momentum. Margaret poured her heart into its work, organizing programs for single parents and their children. Samuel often accompanied her to events, his natural charm and kindness making him a favorite among attendees. One evening, as they prepared for the foundation's first annual gala, Samuel looked up at Margaret with a shy smile. He began, "Do you think Mom can see us? What we're doing for her?" Margaret knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "I believe she can, Samuel," she said softly, "and I think she's very proud of you." Samuel grinned, his confidence growing with each day. Margaret realized that Samuel was not only healing but thriving. The gala proved to be a turning point for Margaret and the foundation. Held in the grand ballroom of a local venue, the event attracted families, donors, and community leaders who shared a common purpose, honoring Anna's legacy by supporting those in need. Margaret stood at the podium, addressing the crowd with a newfound sense of purpose. "This foundation is more than an organization," she said, her voice steady. "It's a testament to the strength of single parents and their children, people like my daughter Anna, who faced challenges with courage and love." The room erupted in applause, but Margaret's focus was on Samuel, who beamed at her from the front row. He had helped distribute flyers and even made a short speech thanking everyone for supporting his mother's memory. His words touched the audience deeply, showcasing the impact Anna had left behind. That night, as they returned home, Samuel curled up beside Margaret on the couch. "Mom would have loved tonight," he said, his voice tinged with both pride and longing. "She would have," Margaret agreed, holding him close. The weeks following the gala brought new beginnings for both Margaret and Samuel. The foundation continued to grow, helping dozens of families find stability and hope. Margaret found herself spending more time at community events, connecting with people whose stories mirrored Anna's. Samuel, now a confident and curious young boy, thrived in school and within the foundation's circle. He often spoke about his mother during events, his heartfelt words inspiring others. "My mom always said love makes us strong," he shared during a school presentation. "And now my grandma is showing me how to keep her love alive." Margaret, hearing this, felt a profound sense of pride. She had spent years building her empire, yet it was these moments with Samuel's words, his growth, and his resilience that redefined what legacy meant to her. One quiet afternoon, Samuel approached Margaret with a small box in his hands. Inside was a photo of Anna holding a younger Samuel. "I think we should keep this here," he said, placing it on the mantel in the living room. Margaret nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "It belongs there," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Months later, as spring arrived, Margaret and Samuel prepared to move into a new phase of their lives. Margaret had decided to downsize from her sprawling mansion to a smaller, cozier home, closer to the community center where the foundation operated. The decision felt right, a symbolic step toward embracing the life Anna had envisioned for. On the day of the move, Samuel ran through the nearly empty mansion, his laughter echoing off the walls. "I'll miss this place," he admitted, stopping by the large window overlooking the garden. Margaret smiled, standing beside him.
This house gave us some wonderful memories,
she said, wrapping an arm around his shoulder. "But it's not the house that makes a home, it's the people in it." As they settled into their new home, the warmth and love they shared turned the modest space into a haven. The foundation became their focus, a project that grew in both scope and in the final scene, Margaret and Samuel sat on the porch, watching the sun set. Margaret kissed the top of his head. "No, Samuel, thank you for giving me a second chance to love and be loved." As time went on, Margaret and Samuel's bond only grew stronger. The small house they now called home became a lively hub of activity, Neighbors would often drop by to chat with Margaret or bring gifts for Samuel, who had become a cherished member of the community. One day, as they sat together in the backyard planting flowers, Samuel turned to Margaret with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think Mom would like our?" he asked, his small hands patting down the soil. Margaret smiled, her heart warming at the thought. "Your mom always had a way of making things grow, just like you are doing now." Samuel beamed, his face glowing with pride. For Margaret, these simple moments became the most meaningful part of her day. Each laugh, smile, and shared story reminded her of the promise she had made to Anato, ensure Samuel grew up surrounded by. The foundation continued to thrive, and Margaret made it her mission to give back as much as she. Every new success brought a renewed sense of purpose, and with Samuel by her side, she felt a sense of fulfillment that no material achievement had ever. In the final months of the year, Margaret decided to host a special event at the Foundationa celebration of Anna's life, and the work her legacy had inspired. The evening was filled with laughter, heartfelt stories, and an outpouring of gratitude from the families. The foundation. Samuel, now more confident than ever, stood before the crowd to give a speech. "This foundation is here because of my mom," he began, his voice steady, "and she taught me to be kind and to never give up. And now my grandma and I are working to help other families, just like she would have." The audience erupted in applause, moved by the young boy's words. Margaret, standing off to the side, felt tears of pride streaming down her. She knew Anna's spirit lived on not just through the foundation, but through Samuel's unwavering strength and kindness. Later that evening, as they walked home under a starlit sky, Samuel reached for Margaret. "Do you think we'll always keep helping people, Grandma?" he asked. Margaret squeezed his hand gently. "As long as we're able to, Samuel," she said with a smile. "Helping others is the best way to honor your mom, and it's the best way to live." Together, they walked into their cozy home, their hearts full of hope for the future.